welcome back again to Litigation Help. My name is Heather Hui-Litwin, and welcome to this part 3 of our video series on financial disclosure. So today, of course, I'm so lucky that I have Shmuel-start with us again. In this video, we're going to talk about part 2 of the Form 13.1, which is on expenses. So take it away.
Thank you. People get very flustered over the expenses, and rightfully so. It's, you're filling out a form here and you're trying to be accurate to some extent, we hope. And it's hard to be accurate for something that's a moving target. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, expenses brings up the anxiety of separation. What's going to be? What's the future? How am I going to be supporting or supported, right? Both sides.
Right.
The person who's going to be paying support doesn't, has anxiety about how much they're going to be paying. The person who needs support would be wondering when they're going to receive it and how much. And nothing focuses that than thinking about your expenses. So I understand why it's so difficult to put together this section. And to that extent, I would say, relax. Sometimes I actually ask clients to start with that section. And the reason for that is, that with income, we had started with document collection.
Right, I remember.
When we get to property, we're going to be discussing information like listing before we talk about documentation. In other words, we need some basic information before we can even start collecting documents.
Right.
With expenses, I tell clients, do your best, really, try it. Try just to fill it out without any pieces of paper. And you'll find out that you can kind of, you can break down certain expenses into categories with it like in your mind without even putting too much thought into it. There are expenses that are hard, what I like to call hard. They are predictable, the amount is fixed, and they're not changing, okay? So that's an example of that would be rent or mortgage, property taxes, for the most part, insurance payments, sometimes even cell phone payments, depending on your plan. Those are very predictable and consistent, and you can probably just fill it out, not in order, but find where they are, turn it into a monthly amount. They usually are monthly already, and you can put it in, you can plug it into your expenses. Then you're going to have expenses that are soft, and those are the ones that are based basically on consumption, right? So as an example of those, groceries, to fix up the house, like just the basic hardware kind of expenses, gas. And for those kinds of expenses, you can estimate, as long as you say so. I'm estimating.
I see. Okay.
Just say it. I am estimating this amount, or just say estimated, or put a star. And you can, even with those expenses, based on your experience, how much you pay per fill up to fill your car. You know how much you pay for transit. You know how much you pay for groceries even. Oh, my average grocery bill is X plus a Costco run, Y. I can figure this out, right? Like, and it's okay to estimate. You do not need to have a separate spreadsheet. You don't need to have even the backing documents, like your energy bill or whatever, like you can estimate these numbers, and that's okay. Where it gets complicated, where it gets complicated is just at part 1, which I'll show you, and self-employment. Okay.
Always.
So part 1 are your automatic deductions from income. And the reason why those are complicated is that you can't extrapolate the information from a pay stub the same way you can of your gross pay. Okay,
Mhm.
so and the reason why you can't extrapolate is that they cap out. So like CPP has a maximum, and you may hit it or you may not hit it. Same with EI.
Mm.
Yeah, union dues, definitely. The income taxes are just complicated in general.
Yes.
So I
Right.
mean, I will tell you a secret that lawyers use is that we have software for calculating support, and within that software, it calculates taxes. It calculates all that stuff.
Oh,
So,
okay.
so
Wow.
but then the question is, what do people who don't have that software do?
Right.
And the answer I'm going to tell you is that you can go to my website, and sorry, it's under education resources,
Cool. Okay.
and they're not perfect because I'm figuring out what's available online.
Mhm.
But there's a section here, websites, you'll
Yes.
find really helpful. Okay, so education resources, and then
Right.
scroll down.
Right.
Obviously, the CRA, my account we discussed.
Yeah. Right.
But for the budget, I have links to a tax calculator, which will actually tell you your tax if you plug in your
Oh.
income. And it's funny, but for employers,
Mhm.
Revenue Canada has a calculator to figure out CPP and EI. You have to play with it a little bit. There's also a chart there, and you use your income against a percentage. With a little bit of playing around, and you can figure out your CPP and EI. Okay, so those are helpful websites for those particular things that cap out.
Okay.
When it comes to union dues, I like to tell clients to look at their last year's tax return just to see, because usually they don't change that much.
Mhm.
Um, and then you have the self-employed. So we're going to talk about self-employed, and then there's the third issue is there's 3 and 4, which we'll talk about very quickly. But for the self-employed, the biggest issue is that up here we had said there's a gross and there's a net,
Right. I remember.
and that getting to that net includes deducting expenses, and some of those expenses, there's overlap between personal use and business use. But the bigger problem is that your net number, let's say it's 100, just to make the number, okay?
Mhm.
That number is net of those expenses.
Right.
So if you were to include the same expenses down here,
Yeah.
and the most obvious one is car expenses,
Mhm.
which people can deduct from their business expenses, from their business income.
Mhm.
There could be double counting. So we
Yeah.
want to avoid double counting, because then that's not going to be a very accurate outcome.
Mhm.
So to the extent that you can figure out
Hmm.
what portion of whether any of the well, let's say it a different way. If you're, let's say you have $100 of car expenses, on your tax return, it will actually have in one of the schedules how much of the car expenses you're deducting as a percentage, right? Based on mileage.
Mhm.
So you take the other amount, and and that is your personal amount, basically. Like, there are shortcuts to figuring this out. Another complicated one is business use of home,
Yeah.
where all of these expenses, water, heat, electricity, right?
Yeah. Right.
Even part of your mortgage,
Right.
people will start deducting that, and you don't want to double count. So you have to take a good look at your tax return and see if you can carve that out, and then put the personal amount into this part of the financial statement.
Okay.
Many people also get very confused as to what period of time am I doing? Am I doing the last 12 months? Am I doing the calendar year?
Exactly.
What am I doing here?
Exactly. I was going to ask.
Yes, I mean, and the short answer is there are
Yeah.
2 answers. Okay.
Okay.
Answer number 1
Yeah.
is whatever period of time this income is,
Uh-huh.
that's what these expenses are for.
Okay.
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 So let's say you're laid off. That's a good example.
Right.
And you're showing up here
Yeah.
your EI income.
Right.
It's okay to put a note under vacations,
Mhm.
you know, usually I don't know, let's say $250 a month,
Mm.
but not now. Not now,
You
right?
can do
Like,
the writing.
yeah, you can do that. You
I didn't
can,
know that.
yeah, the other thing that you can put in writing that often comes up is like cable and internet and cell phone if you have a package,
Yeah, yeah.
right? You can say, I'm gonna make $200 and say included in internet. So you could do that
You
here
can make
also.
notes, like comments.
Yeah, little comments. Now, most people try to avoid putting them into the money side of it. Like if it was
Yeah.
possible to put comments over here
Yes.
next to the word cell phone, that would be preferable. This form, the government form that we've been using, does not do the
Does not
math
allow you
for
to do
you.
that. Yeah.
So if you're going to do the math anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Right, right.
So that's a common issue. The other question that people ask is there any particular expenses that I should be focusing on, right? And it's a good question, because really the question is, why am I filling this out at all? What, like,
Right.
this is a very tedious
Yeah.
work project, right?
Mhm.
Make work project, and
Yeah.
it's not. In fact, I've seen some people in mediations, especially, where they say, you know, skip the expenses page. Don't worry about it.
Mhm.
And I'm actually a very big proponent of not skipping the expenses,
Oh,
because it's in the, you know, the best way I could say it is that it's in the expenses that you build credibility and trust for the rest of your financial statement.
wow. Okay.
Okay, so let me explain how that works. I like to think of the expenses as the gear, the pedals part of a bicycle. It's
Okay.
the middle of the bicycle.
Mhm.
You have on the front end, depends on the, let's just use that. On the front end, you have your income.
Yeah.
And on the back end, you have your net worth.
Mhm.
And, you know, between your income and your net worth is money being spent or not being spent,
Right.
right? Your
Right.
net worth will go up if you're not spending more than your income.
Right.
Your net income will go down, right?
Right.
If you're spending more than you earn.
Yeah.
So that concept of the link
Yeah.
between your income side of your financial statement and your property becomes very apparent. So after you do this calculation of subtotals, right? And then you put in your total monthly and then the total annually, just multiplying by 12. You can then compare it to your means, not your income, your means right over here at line 13. And you can start to ask yourself, does this make sense? Are my expenses more or less than what I'm claiming to have as total available income?
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, got it.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one element of credibility that lawyers love to look at,
Wow.
because it's a very easy comparison. You know, you just look at the two
Yeah.
numbers and you subtract them, you see.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you know, if you're going to put a car loan or lease payment over here, I'm just putting 100, right, just to see it.
Yep.
There better be a car listed
Oh,
on your
that's true.
financial
Oh, that's
statement,
good. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that also will appear for life insurance, because there's a section in the property for insurance,
Right.
right? And then you get into the children's expenses, which we're going to talk about in 1 minute. Just before we get to the children's expenses,
Oh.
the budget is not usually looked at in law until the basic standard calculations are done. So in other words, most of family law starts with a presumption that about 80% of the time the law is going to work for most people.
Okay.
And then there's a 20% of the time where we need to look a little bit more granular. Further, we need to understand what the true circumstances are from a means and needs basis.
Right.
Okay. And I'll give an example when we get to the children's expenses, but that kind of granular look at the financial statement and financial circumstances will come up with such legal claims, spousal support when there is like a very big disparity in income and high income. Child support when there are issues of shared parenting and one parent is paying more of the day-to-day expenses for a child. An undue hardship claim, which is also under child support. Again, I'm not going into the detail, but this, at some point, people are going to say, I can't afford this. I can't do this, right? Or on the flip side, you can do this. Yeah. And we will look at the budget, and the budget has to make sense. Okay. The biggest place where this will come up is children's expenses. Right. Okay. What we call in the legal world, Section 7, right. Special or extraordinary expenses. So let's just talk about that for to conclude on expenses. Okay. So in my my checklist, at the last page, you can click on if you're seeking child expenses to set them out and to provide documentation for them. Okay. And I'm going to show you the law because you might as well just see the law. It's kind of copied here anyway. It's actually in the back end of the financial statement where you list the children's expenses. Over here, you'll see that there's a note, and pursuant to child support guidelines, a court can order parents or of a child to share the costs. And it says necessary childcare expenses, medical insurance, extraordinary expenses. That's this list here in the financial statement is a summary of the child support guidelines, which has it over here. Okay. Medical and dental insurance, but here's the special or extraordinary expenses. Okay. Okay. And here's the child care expenses incurred as a result of employment, illness, disability, or education or training, portion of medical and dental insurance premiums, health-related expenses, etc. Okay. And the reason why I'm showing this is that there are two elements that, or let's say three, that I would want the people to take away with this. The chart here asks you to name the child, name the expense, the amount, and the tax credit or deduction, which we'll talk about as number 3. It doesn't explain why you're listing them. Okay, and so you should say, let's say the child's name is child. I'm just doing in caps for easy thing, and then the expense is daycare. Say it. Say, let's say it's We Care Daycare, fine. Okay. Right. Needed so I can go to work. The why. Why is this expense necessary on the one hand, perhaps, or in the best interest of the child? Let's do a different one. Braces. Okay. Needed as recommended by orthodontist. Okay, not every single expense is going to be so clean and easy. Let's say swimming program, right? Okay, child needs exercise. Okay, right? Sometimes what people will say is, the child has been enrolled in it forever and we're just continuing what already was. That's fine, but say it. Explain why. It will go very far. And especially when you get into extracurricular activities, you're going to find that they build up, and there's going to be a point there's going to be a moment where somebody's going to say it's too much. Right. And there's law on that. And there's an element of discretion by the court. So it's not a yes or no question. It's a exercise of, let's look at the expenses. Let's look at the budget. Let's see if in the totality, all of these expenses are reasonable. Once we've passed that they're necessary. So that's item number 1. Item number 2 is to say, if you're going to put down an expense here, make sure you have a piece of paper for it. It could even just be one piece of paper. So for example, I have in my box here, summer camp invoice, right? It doesn't matter, but it's here in my box under expenses for Charlie.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so that's number 2, get paper. Number 3 is that you need to know that the law says that if there's a tax credit or deduction related to an expense off the top, as we say, that will be factored into the calculation of the expense for the purposes of sharing the expense. So very simply said, if you have a daycare expense and you have subsidies for it, so the expenses, I'm just making this up, $5,000 over the course of the year, but they will give you a subsidy of $1,000, then you need to note that there is a subsidy, even if you don't know the amount. Say yes. Okay, just say it so that it's acknowledged, and then you can figure it out later, but at least say it.
Wow.
Once a subsidy is very easy because it's like it's usually on the paper where the expense is. A subsidy is another word of saying a discount. So if you go to a dentist and they give you a discount, then that would be that we would need to know that. More complicated are tax deductions or tax credits, and most common. Let's see if I have this up here. I don't have it up, so I'm just going to skip through it. Is that on your tax return on the 1, 2, 3, 4th page of your tax return, there is a place where you can deduct childcare expenses from your taxes. And there are tax laws as to who can make that deduction. And then there's the issue of calculating that deduction. And unfortunately, it's not so straightforward of how we can figure out that amount. Again, we have software, the lawyers have software. There is online, the My Support Calculator. I believe it can do that. You might have to pay for it. But there is a method of figuring out how much the value of the tax credit or deduction is. In the case of daycare, it's a deduction. So you're actually paying less tax.
Right.
Okay, so there you go. That's the short of explaining how to fill out expenses. Don't take it lightly, but don't kill yourself over it. That's my advice. And remember, you obviously want to be as accurate as you can be without overstating, definitely not understating. And there's going to, if you have questions, you just note it. Say, listen, I know this is an estimate based on my thought at the moment. I'm paying less because of COVID, for just as an example, but I expect it to be more. I guess I would end off by saying that if you expect your circumstances to materially change or substantially change, let's say, in the back of the financial statement is where is it? Is it on this one? Oh, they don't even have it on the. What many people do, and it's on the lawyer's version of the form, but not here, is to duplicate this Part 2 expenses and create what's called a proposed expense budget. So most often that will arise when you have, when you're planning on moving out of a house or a home or whatever, that break of when you're going to be living on your own. And you're going to have new accommodations, that those expenses will be different probably than what you've been paying until now. The only other thing I'm just thinking of, all like the little anomalies of expenses, is that immediately after separation, if you have expenses that are being paid by somebody else, usually the other spouse, let's say you're in the house and they're paying the mortgage, then you should note that also. And on the flip side, if you're paying those expenses, you should note it.
Oh,
right? Yeah, because there will become an issue as to whether you're paying the appropriate amount of formal support. There will be the issue of post-separation credits. So you want to note if you're paying expenses that you're not receiving direct benefit out of, usually when you're paying the spouse. So there's a lot to think about when you're making these, when you're writing out your budget, but start from the simple. What are your hard expenses? And then work from your way from there and make notes. They don't have to be copious, just for those items that you feel are not represented well with a simple number. There you go. I hope that's been helpful. Do you have any questions?
Is it all over my face that I? Yes, because so let's say I'm separated from my husband and I want to file for divorce, but we're living in the same house and we're splitting the expenses 50-50, very fair, right? Like, so for example, like hydro. Okay, so whatever the hydro is each month, we contribute 50% from each of our own, like. So in that case, we just put in half, like, so if there's a utility bill, and I mean, I just put in half the amount, right?
So that's a fascinating question. That's actually a very good question. It touches on a part that I didn't get to actually. So I'm going to show it to you.
Okay.
And it's the answer is it depends. There is a part 3 right after the expenses saying other income earners in the home.
I see.
This actually is a tricky section to fill out. So let me answer your question very bluntly. If you need to quickly do a financial statement, you can do, this is what I'm actually out of pocket paying.
Right.
So for example, that we have a rent and it costs $2,000 a month, you could just write $1,000, right? Yeah. And somewhere you need to make a note. This is like what I'm paying out of pocket. Okay. But it's begging for a proposed budget to explain what your actual expenses are going to be when this situation ends, right? The other way of doing it is to say, here's our total household budget. So here's the $2,000.
Yeah.
And then you can say here, my spouse or partner or other adults, number 7, contributes about a certain amount of money, or you could just change it to percentage.
Okay.
50% per month.
Got it.
Where this becomes very complicated, and I don't want to get too much into it because it is complicated, is when there's a motion to change and you're living with a new spouse. Okay.
Yeah.
It gets very touchy as to filling out question number 6, 5, and 6. What my new spouse or partner is earning. Well, why do you have that information? That's a third party.
Yeah.
So I mean, and you do have to fill it out when the form asks you to fill it out, which is for a claim of undue hardship or spousal support. And there's good reason for it. But it's a problem. It's not, there's case law on this. And what I would recommend for the general user is just fill it out to the best of your ability. And if you don't want to put out the amount that the person's earning, at the very least, just at least fill out how much they're contributing toward the expenses. Okay. I'm not saying that it's not, that you're correct in not filling out the form, but what I'm saying is at least put the 50% or the amount toward the expenses above, because we are trying to figure out your means and needs.
That is really great, because that actually clarified a big question that I had when I was going through this exercise. Because I was like, I'm looking at my hydro bill, right?
Right.
And I'm like, there's a number there now. But wait a second. So let's imagine hypothetically that I'm the breadwinner, let's say, and I have a dependent spouse, right? And they're not contributing at all. So in that case, I would feel, yeah, that makes sense that I put in the whole amount. But let's say we split 50-50. Like, well, shouldn't I just put in half? Like, I was thinking,
Right.
yeah, it makes more sense.
It's tricky. It's tricky. But
Ah, okay.
and again, I think you can get away with doing that as long as you're clear of what you're
Clear.
doing.
Okay.
All right. And
Right.
again,
Makes
it's
sense.
begging the question,
Right.
if your income is relevant, what is, or sorry, if your means and needs are relevant, then what are your actual total expenses? And what is the other, what else is going on in your household about other people paying toward those expenses? So it is relevant.
But these questions that are going to come up, would it be in questioning, the stage in questioning, or is it at the trial? Like what, because you're mentioning that, okay, well, it begs the question, okay, but when is this question that's being begged? When is it going to come up? Is it during the questioning stage?
It would come up in the, no, the questioning stage is after you've provided your basic disclosure,
Right.
there can be further questions. That's when it will come up.
Okay.
So questioning is part of that middle part of it.
Right. Yeah.
Whether you're in court or out of a court proceeding, there's the information gathering.
Further question. Yeah.
Right.
Almost like a
And
follow-up, which is fair, right? Because if you provided and
it,
there are
it,
questions, then
it
people.
depends on how relevant that question is to the overarching issues.
Mm,
So, so I understand from a
right.
privacy perspective, and nobody wants to pull in their new spouse into their old
Yeah.
spouse's problems.
Yeah.
Um, I'm the first to appreciate that. But yeah, you have to realize that just by providing basic information doesn't necessarily mean you're going to involve them. Sometimes providing basic information just glosses over and then people move forward and move on. So it is what it is. I have problems with it. Like giving information about a third party is problematic. I think a better question to be added to the financial statement would be, are you income splitting with your new spouse? Right? For self-employed people, right? Okay, whatever. We're not here to discuss what could be.
We're just going to go off for a few hours.
What is in front of us. So again, I just want to conclude, there are lots of these questions of what am I doing here? And it's so complicated. But start with what you know, what's easy. Fill in what you can average after that. And then for everything else, put little notes. And that will keep you, credible. And moving forward, we'll continue into assets and debts.
Wow, that is so helpful. That's again so reassuring too, because for some reason I thought that if you don't fill out the actual black and white correct number, you're going to get in trouble. I don't know. I just kind of had that impression the way I looked at the form. But thank you so much for this information today. And just to our viewers as well, thank you very much for being with us and staying with us all the way to the end. We are going to have more videos coming up. Shmuel, tell us, what is our next video?
Well, we're going to be going through the rest of the financial statements. So the next biggie is going to be assets and debts and net family property.
And matrimonial home is included in this discussion?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, big one. So stay with us. And for those of you who are new to our channel, we'd love for you to subscribe, and we'll see you at the next video. Bye.